Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome to season 2, episode 3 of Teach Play Disc Golf, sponsored, brand new sponsor here by GottaGoGottaThrow, Squatch Disc Golf, Putt Confidently, and EA Sports Sacks. I'm your host Antonio, and today, everybody, I have a very special guest with me. You might recognize him as the Mr. to the Mr. and Mrs. Bogey, but we have Nick on the show from Mr. and Mrs. Bogey on Instagram. Nick, how's it going, man?
Hey man, it's going well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited to just hang out and chat. For those of you that, as I just mentioned, Nick and his wife have an Instagram account, and it's called Mr. and Mrs. Bogey. I'll put the link in the description. But if you're not following them, you definitely want to follow them. A lot of fun disc golf content. And Nick, I'm just really excited to have you on the show, man, to just talk disc golf and just kind of connect as disc golf content creators and hang out. So I'm super excited about it. How you feeling tonight?
I'm doing great, man. And likewise, it's funny because, I've been in the game for quite a while at this point, and I can recall seeing, I think, videos of yours on YouTube from quite a long time ago. So
Yeah,
I've been familiar for a long time, and
I
I'm sure as
appreciate
soon as,
it.
yeah, I'm sure as soon as I saw, you on Instagram, I was like, oh, that's an instant follow. So.
Oh yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, it's not very hard to do the math, but I was doing the math a couple weeks ago, and September is going to be 5 years that I posted my first video on YouTube. So pretty incredible stuff. Actually, I wasn't planning on bringing that up, but yeah. So for those of you who are listening or watching on YouTube, one of the things that I'm hoping to do is that around September for the 5-year Gladiator disc golf anniversary, I'm hoping to get some custom discs and everything. So if you are interested in that, obviously let me know in the comments below. Message me on Instagram or on Discord or whatever. I'd love to, just kind of see what kind of molds you guys are interested in and stamps and that kind of thing. So just wanted to drop that in there. But let's go ahead and let's run real quickly through the outline of the show. That way you guys know what we're talking about. So we're going to spend the first chunk of time just getting to know Nick. And part of getting to know Nick is also the fact that he plays lefty. And it is not by choice. It is the fact that he is dominantly left hand. So we're going to talk about the challenges of playing lefty and all those things, especially in disc golf right now. And then we're going to dive into the forehand, because one of the things that you may not know, but you will know after this, is that a lot of lefty players have some pretty solid forehands, and we'll get into this into the reason why. And then we're going to review Nick's favorite disc, which I won't spoil now. You'll have to listen to hear it, but we're going to review his favorite disc, and that will be it for the show. So without further ado, Nick, let's get into it.
Yes, sir.
Alrighty, Nick. So let's just start at the very beginning. How did you get into disc golf?
So I mean, before I got into disc golf, I grew up skateboarding. So that really, molded a lot of, my interests and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, all sorts of things, friendships. And so growing up, I skateboarded from age like 12 until
Mm-hmm.
when I was 18, I tore my ACL skateboarding, which
Oh
is,
man.
yeah, I mean, it happens to a lot of skateboarders. You're jumping down a lot of big stuff. So just after high school, tore my ACL. I
Mm.
remember not knowing what happened. I went and got my knee scanned, and I got paperwork from a doctor, and it said you have torn your anterior ligament, anterior cruciate ligament,
Mm.
and I didn't connect that with ACL. So I was like, oh, I tore
Right.
some ligament in my knee. And then once I kind of found out the severity, I was like, okay, we need to get this fixed, and went through the
Yeah.
surgery, which was,
Oh man.
long, painful, expensive, etc. And then probably a year later, I tore it again skateboarding. And that was
Oh
kind of when
no.
I had to make the decision, like, okay, for longevity of being able to walk, I
Yeah.
cannot continue to skateboard, which
Oh,
is
that's
tough.
hard.
It was a tough decision to have to make, but it was like, I mean, I can't keep going through this
Yeah.
surgery, and perhaps they basically say each time you get it done, the success rate's lower and lower.
Yeah.
So I don't have an ACL in my right knee, which a lot of people are
Whoa.
surprised to hear. I have no ACL. But yeah, so I just kind of went about my way for a while. And then my
Mm-hmm.
buddy, he brought me to kind of like your fun, casual 18-hole course, very attackable for like beginner
Hmm.
players, called Highland Park in St. Paul. And I think I shot like +8. And I was like, I am ready for the pro tour. Not knowing that straight shots like open 150 like really wasn't
Yeah.
and then the second course I played, I shot like +30 because it was like a real course. So I was like, okay, I got humbled very fast. But it's really all it took at that point. I think my first disc that I went and bought was I think it was a Champion Vulcan. I think it's like a 14 speed or something.
Yeah, they're
As it
fast. Yeah.
yeah, as it typically goes, way too fast. Um,
It's like, oh,
and then
I couldn't reach that 150-foot hole. Let me get the fastest disc that I can find.
clearly I just didn't have a fast enough disc. And I think my second one was a Zeus, which is hilarious because, at this point I probably wouldn't even bag a Zeus just for the sake of like, I'm trying to let the disc do the work. You know what I mean?
So, so if a Zeus was like the second disc, how long ago did you start playing?
So I would guess it was probably like 4 or 5 years ago. I'm trying to
Okay.
think, honestly. I think I was probably 25. I'm currently 30, so probably about 5 years ago, I'd say.
Okay.
I don't think I really did much of anything with it for like the first 2 years. I think it was just kind of the
Okay.
one
So you're
disc
kind of
type.
just playing like casual every couple months kind of thing.
Yeah, it wasn't really until everything kind of shut down in 2020
Yeah.
that was like, that's when the Instagram thing came about. That's when it was
Yeah.
like playing every
Okay.
day, built an actual bag and went
Uh-huh.
from there.
Very cool. Okay, so I'm trying to think. Um, so last episode, I had Kevin Parsons from Putt Confidently on, a sponsor of me and the show and my YouTube channel, and we were talking, and he was into like skateboarding and basketball and everything as well, but he also started playing around this same time, like 2019, 2020. I picked up disc golf in 2018, and so it's actually funny. You're like, oh, you're 30. I just turned 30 as well.
Hmm.
And so it's just very cool, like starting to meet a lot of these guys because of this show and just reaching out to people like very similar experiences. And when we got into disc golf, like getting into disc golf in 2018 was really cool because Jomez was a thing, Central Coast Disc Golf was a thing, and there were a couple smaller ones, like there was Par Save and um, like Spin TV was still kind of like putting out content, but we didn't have all the media companies that we necessarily have today. And so it's just really fun watching disc golf content in 2018, which doesn't feel all that long ago, but when you look at where disc golf is now with live coverage and all this stuff and so many media companies, it's really cool to think back uh, to all of that. So you got into disc golf after tearing your ACL twice, skateboarding. Um, what was that transition like? I know you talked about how for like the first 2 years or so or 3 years you didn't really play a whole lot. It was kind of just fun, one disc rounds, but with 2020 starting to get into it more seriously, like what was that progression like for you? Did it kind of just start as like, hey, it's getting me outside, or was it like, you know what, I really enjoy doing this casually, apparently there's competitions for it, like let me look into it that way?
Hmm. So I definitely found Jomez, and I can recall at the time I was working as an assistant general manager at a hotel, and I would often get stuck having to cover the overnight shifts when we'd have people called off. And just to literally stay awake, I would just watch Jomez for hours. And that was like my big introduction to a lot of like the big name courses, a lot of the big
Cool.
names in disc golf, Paul
Mm-hmm.
McBeth and Simon Lizotte, et cetera. So, I mean, that's really what kind of got me more interested in like the actual like competitive side of things. I didn't
Yeah.
really have any interest myself in competing. I didn't have anywhere near enough of a game at that point.
Right.
It was really just like, you know, chucking sidearms and whatnot.
Uh,
Really, what kind of started opening that whole realm and was starting Instagram and starting to find local guys. Like I started an
mm,
Instagram page, and within like 15 minutes, I found Derek Lawson. I had no idea who he was, but I found his page, and I was like, a lefty disc golfer from Minnesota who's way better than me. Like, I never expected that, years later he'd be a good friend. I literally just got
That's
back
awesome.
yesterday from Charlotte with him. At the time I was like, oh, this guy's way too cool. There's no way I'm ever going to beat this guy. So
Very cool. So from the get-go, as a lefty, you were just throwing sidearms. Did you try even backhands, or was just the courses you were playing were just better suited for the forehand?
I definitely started to mess around with it. I would say with yeah, like I'm sure for like first 6 months, year, it was just
Mm-hmm.
like almost entirely forehand. I
Yeah.
think I just didn't gravitate towards it as much, and I didn't come from like a baseball background or tennis
Okay.
or anything like that. So I
Right.
think it was the only reason why is because the guys who actually introduced me to this day basically throw all sidearms. So they're just kind of casual players that throw
Okay.
all sidearm.
Yeah.
So that's
Emu
what I
you
saw.
Yeah, exactly. You were just emulating what you were saying. Oh, people throw forehands in disc golf.
Hmm.
Very cool, very cool. So obviously we'll get into talking, about playing lefty here in a little bit. But one of the other things that you kind of mentioned is like living in Minnesota. And we know that Minnesota gets a lot of snow for like half the year. So what are some of the challenges of playing disc golf in a state where seemingly the conditions would not be good enough to play for a significant portion of the year? Like what's that like as a disc golfer? How does it affect your game? Kind of feel free to take this and whatever kind of resonates with you.
Yeah, so I definitely struggled for a long time of not just understanding like when is the right time to play in the winter. So
Mm,
like if you get a big snowfall, most experienced winter disc golfers are not going out in any sort of like fresh powder because that's when finding your discs becomes
yeah.
exponentially harder. You want to wait until that snow, the sun's on it, it settles, it gets kind of packed down so your
Mm-hmm.
disc isn't as likely to completely, bury down to the ground because that's when, you might see where your disc went in and it could be 20 feet away and it just slid right through the powder and it's impossible
Oh,
to find.
wow.
So, you can't go out and play every day, or if you do, you're going to be searching for your discs a lot more.
Mm,
So I'm far more selective now. And if I do play, I do like to go to courses that try to accommodate winter disc golfers. Normally, those are the pay to plays like Blue Ribbon Pines. They do a great
mm-hmm.
job of going out. The tee pads are normally shoveled, salted. I mean, there's basically no snow or ice on them because they take care of them. There's normally a
That's cool.
beaten path between
Mm-hmm.
holes, so as long as you can try to stick to the fairways, and they also will, like in like large open fields where you're throwing over it, they will go out and like plow in the field, and so there'll just be giant piles of snow, but at least like the majority of the fairway is close to the ground, so
Oh,
it's
wow.
not.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's super accommodating. So it's great to go to
Mm,
places like that. But if you go to a course that has not been played, you
yeah.
have to shovel all the tee pads yourself,
That
and
sounds miserable.
that's why I just
I can't
I don't do it.
imagine just like, all right, I'm going playing disc golf. Why are you taking the snow shovel? I'm gonna need it. Like that just like playing disc golf, especially in adverse conditions, already is tough. And then to be like, oh yeah, before I throw, I'm gonna shovel every single tee pad because I might
Hmm.
be the first person there, or it's gonna be like not great, what someone else did, or it's snow season. That just sounds really challenging. What are some ways that you have found to accommodate for like playing in the snow? Like what are some things I've heard of like the ribbons and everything that people put, but some people said it doesn't really work that great. Like when you go and play in the snow, how do you prepare your discs?
I really don't do a whole lot nowadays. I would say I don't know a single pro player who plays in the winter who does use ribbons, chalk, anything like that. It's kind of just a matter of watch your discs, don't throw a bunch of shots. Try to
Mm,
limit it to one shot if you can. I know you want to practice, but like if that's the conditions, just don't do it. Um, yeah, just basically just being mindful of the fact that it's like you got to make sure you know exactly where that thing is, and it
mm,
sometimes will still take a long time to find it. So just being
yeah.
more disciplined. So yeah, I just kind of make sure that the conditions are as good as they can be. I say that I've also played in like blizzards just for the fun of it and for content.
To say you've done it. To say you've done it.
Of course.
Okay, very cool. So How long does a round take when you're playing in the snow like that and you're having to look for your disc that often?
If you're playing a course like BRP, Blue Ribbon
Mm-hmm.
Pines, which is 27 holes and it's a busy course, they have a big community there. A league round in the winter can take like 4.5 hours, like
That's insane.
easily. Yeah, if you get
Wow.
there, yeah, especially with daylight in the winter, like you have to be super like mindful of stuff like that because I've had times where it was like, there's just no way we can finish this league round, and for some guys, that's a no go. Like they're there to try to win, so they
Mm-hmm.
can, you know, they're playing against their peers, and there's
Right,
money
right.
involved, etc. So
Oh man, wow. Um, yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, I've played multiple rounds in one day, but the fact of a round taking 4.5 hours just sounds mentally exhausting. That just,
it's very, very tough to enjoy it in moments like that,
yeah.
especially with backups where you're just like, okay, we got
Mm,
three groups ahead of us and we just gotta hurry up and wait.
yeah. All right, so playing in Minnesota, playing lefty, you've mentioned some really beautiful courses like Blue Ribbon Pines that we've seen on coverage before. I know you and Derek Lawson, another fellow Minnesotan lefty player as well, post a lot of videos from BRP. When you go and kind of just, regardless of the course that you're playing, like what kind of discs do you carry to accommodate your game? Like what's in the bag, basically?
It's funny actually, having just got back from Charlotte, I kind of had my
Mm-hmm.
eyes open to like needing to be focusing more on mid-range and fairways just because it was like every course was, I would say that in comparison, we do have a lot more airspace to work with just because our
Mm,
trees aren't as mature, like our woods aren't as mature as they are there.
okay.
So I kind of lean on, especially as a forehand player, I do lean on more of like the like 9 to 11. I would say my favorite area is like 9 to 11 speed. I don't really throw beyond that a whole
Okay.
lot. Just knowing that for like my arm speed, my game, it works best to just try to like hit angles right, make sure I'm not trying to overpower on shots if you are playing in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually, I feel like I've been that the 5 to 7 slot with forehands, even in like the flippier side, has been something I've been like really playing around with a lot more, just for
Yeah.
the sake of if there's shots that I'm just not confident throwing the backhand
Yeah.
on in the woods, it's like at least I can basically make the forehand work, kind of like a big germ style.
Yeah. Yeah. He likes to take those like flippy thunderbirds of his, just kind of like flip them up to flat and let them just glide and coast. And that's definitely a tough shot to hit. There's a reason why it's not easy to do, and not a lot of players can do it effectively every single time. But very cool. So obviously you're adding some discs to the bag. You talked a little bit about uh playing lefty and those kinds of things. As somebody who obviously has been playing disc golf for 4 or 5 years now, you started pretty much throwing lefty all the time. You do throw backhand from time to time. I do want to touch on that real quick, actually, before we go into just what it is to be playing lefty. How does the backhand or even the forehand work with your right leg missing an ACL? Like, is there a reason why you throw more forehands? Is it because you don't have an ACL, or like what's kind of going on there?
So, to be honest, I've never had any issues with that
Okay.
knee. I've never had like a knee slip or something where, you have that,
Yeah.
hyperextension or anything like that. I am one to kind of come down pretty hard, like stomp wise with the forehand, but
Mm-hmm.
because the foot on the forehand tends to be a little bit more opened up
Yeah.
on my right leg, which would be my lead
Yeah.
leg, it's not
Mm-hmm.
really putting I do know guys who put a lot more like torque or like body weight into that leg than I do. I've also noticed that I kind of have a tendency, if you like slow down my shot, to like have a little bit of a lean, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that I wish I could power through onto that front leg. I'm sure it would have more distance if it was something that I didn't have to be mindful of. But I've just
Mm-hmm.
kind of, learned to work with what I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Uh, ba- yeah, backhand, I would say that, having gotten more familiar with what good form looks like that fast twitch back leg kind of dropping in, that knee dropping in that you'll
Mm-hmm.
see a lot of pros do, which kind of initiates the backhand throw. I
Yep.
really don't have that really great, which could also just be because my backhand's not developed as my forehand. Like if you watch
Hmm.
my forehand, you'll see that like my left knee, my back knee drops in, the toes kind of like I kind of rotate over the toes, which is almost emulating what you do with the backhand. I don't
Hmm.
do that very well on the backhand, which would likely help to increase speed and whatnot. Like I think
Yeah.
I have a tendency to maybe use more upper body than I should to accommodate for the fact that I don't have that great fast twitch with that back knee dropping down.
Yeah, I get all of that. I have both ACLs, but I understand everything that you're saying there, especially about the backhand. That's where you and I kind of like with our games have aligned and matched up pretty well. Like I come from more of an ultimate frisbee background. I played a lot of ultimate frisbee in college. I played disc golf once or twice and hated it. But once I finally got to picking up disc golf several years later after trying it in college, I was like, oh, this is cool. And one of the things I quickly realized is that, oh, my forehand is definitely like my best shot. And so for years, I just was very much forehand dominant, which wasn't great for tournaments when I was doing 2 rounds in one day because the forehand can be exhausting. Um, but yeah, so been working on my backhand too, so I know that feeling. But let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about what it is playing lefty. We don't have to, you know, spend too much time here, but I think it's a pretty unique situation. Like we see a couple of lefty players on tour. We have guys like Chris Clemens. I think Zach Melton is also lefty, and I'm trying to remember. I don't
Austin
know.
Turner. Austin
That's it.
Turner is a
Yeah,
big one.
Austin
Yeah.
Turner. But now that I come to think of it, I don't know of any FPO lefty players off the top of my head.
There was one who recently won, and I don't
Oh,
know her
Emily,
name.
was it Emily Beach? Is she a
No,
lefty? No, she's
she
not.
she is lefty.
She is lefty though. Okay.
I don't. I think it was kind of her. At least for me, I wasn't familiar with her. I think it was. I don't know if it was a Silver Series, but she
Okay.
beat Owen Scoggins. So I'm sorry, I don't know her name. I can't remember. But there was a lefty recently who
Uh,
did win, more backhand dominant. Another MPO player, Nathan Queen, who's been
that's
around
it.
for a long time.
Yep, Nathan Queen. Yeah, I'll have
Hmm.
to look up that made that Silver Series or something, or yeah, we'll figure it out. But anyway, so what I'm getting at is we don't see a lot of lefty players on tour, and it's always really cool when we do see them. And one of the things I think actually this happened at Jonesboro, it was an all lefty card, which was really cool. And then also by chance there was an all Paul card. All four guys had the name Paul, so that was there were a couple cool cards. But yeah, so obviously that thing with having all four players to play lefty. One of the things that some of the commentators were talking about in both post produce and I think in live is that for a lot of lefty players, they don't get the win reads based on when the righty player goes and throws. So it's really cool that they were actually starting to get some win reads off of each other because there's not nearly as many lefty players in disc golf. And just statistically, there are not as many left handed people as there are right handed people. And that being said, as a disc golfer, what are some of the challenges of playing these courses lefty? Like, you probably get used to it when you are playing the same courses in Minnesota over and over and over. You learn the lines, you figure things out, but you go into Charlotte like you did this past week, and now you're tasked with trying to learn these new courses, which are some of them are notoriously difficult, and you're trying to tackle it as a lefty. Like, what are some of the things that you face as a lefty player?
I will say going to Charlotte was a big eye opener for me in terms of like I have to increase the confidence on the backhand side. I swear it was like every other hole would be left to right, right to left to right, right to left, or there was not a whole lot of straight shots. There were maybe if you played the more difficult, longer courses, the fairways would be
Mm-hmm.
stretched out, so you would have longer stretches of long fairways. But if you're playing like the shorter, it seemed like every course that we played that kind of fell in that intermediate side was like every hole was like 260 to 285, but most of the time didn't play like that. You'd step up to like a 270 hole, but it played like 325 because it'd be like a really sharp angle going uphill or something like that. So it did require more distance than you just, on paper than what it looked like. But I definitely was like, oh my gosh, I really need to work on like that backhand confidence unless I'm trying to like really like force shots.
Right.
So, as I mentioned, as our woods aren't as like developed here, I feel like you can get away with it a little bit more in our
Hmm.
area where you can kind of make the shot work. I feel like for so long I didn't even realize I was doing it, but I was basically emulating the right hand shot in many times where it was like I would be playing in a tournament and it'd be like I basically threw the same shot as you guys. Like the amount of times I've heard people say like by like halfway through a round, I didn't even realize you were lefty. It's because it's like I basically was throwing the exact same shot as them, the
Hmm.
exact same line with the forehand. The struggle that I'm running into more is like, okay, I think it's, once you get to those bigger courses, you really do need to
Right.
have that like Chris Clemens type distance if you want to be able to do that.
Hmm.
It's hard to, match a 400 foot and a Peter Heiser in certain circumstances as a
Yeah.
lefty, especially when you're kind of like handcuffed in the woods and it's a tight line. Like it's hard to throw that type of power
Yeah.
accurately in the woods for me personally.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. That throwing a spike hyzer, like you hear these pros talk about like throwing that 400 or 500 foot spike hyzer, like that requires a lot of power. That's not an easy thing to do, and it's not. Throwing a 400 or 500 foot spike hyzer is definitely a challenge. But then when you see guys do it with the forehand, it almost like blows their mind because just the way our body is positioned when throwing a forehand, it can become a lot more um, arm heavy, like having to really get that arm involved a lot more than typically you're supposed to on the backhand. And also the backhand being more from the side, you could kind of get a little bit more of that rotational power coming into it. And so, yeah, playing the forehand, lots of power. And it's always incredible when you see some of these players, like when Eagle was throwing forehands several years ago, like 600-foot forehands. Like that's just, insane stuff because of how tough and challenging it can be. And I can't imagine having to do that every single time. And then as a lefty too, like that definitely sounds challenging in its own way. So speaking of these courses, left to right, right to left, getting used to open fairways, more wooded fairways, that kind of thing. As a lefty, what would kind of be like the preferred course design? Would you want something that's made strictly for left-handed players, or do you prefer that sort of more balanced approach, or does it not matter to you?
There's nothing worse than playing with a card and they're like, oh, great lefty hole. It's like, okay, guys, there's 12 righty holes. I'm not pointing that out to you.
Yeah.
I personally, even though like I don't keep up with, some of my friends who are on the MPO side throwing 600 feet, I can't keep up with them distance wise. I enjoy playing more park style golf just because it's kind of like choose your own adventure
Mm-hmm.
at times, and you get that with wooded courses as well. I like a good mix. I like a park style that mixes in, fun wooded shots.
Right.
I need to change my mentality about stepping up to a hole that's like, okay, there's a 4 foot gap that I have to hit and then follow the entire fairway. Here's this tight fairway all the way to the basket. Those can be like tough for me stepping up to, especially when it's backhand where I'm like, I am not feeling confident about my
Right.
release point in hitting this gap.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a challenge. So the last question I'll kind of ask about this is, and this might be a little too thought provoking, but we'll see. Uh, would you say that your game with your left and your with your forehand, backhand, the balance of it, your approach, like how you approach the basket and those kinds of things, think about more like holistically your entire game. Would you say that your game itself is a reflection of your skills or more of your circumstances? And basically, like, do you play the style of golf that you play because, ooh, that's my skill set, that's my wheelhouse, or is it I have to play this way in order to play these courses and to play disc golf and to have fun? That might sound like a weird question, but it's something that I was wondering. Like when Nick goes and plays disc golf, is he getting to be his creative self with doing the shots that he wants to do, or does he feel like kind of put like a whole, he has to fit this mold in order to play this course?
I would say my focus is always the highest percentage shot, the path of least resistance to get to the basket. For
Mm-hmm.
me, I'm more confident throwing the forehand in a lot of circumstances, but when it comes to like easy distance, like if it's
Mm-hmm.
just an open hole that's 400 feet, I'm throwing backhand on that every single time because I'm confident that I can get there. Whereas with the
Mm-hmm.
forehand, I feel like that at that point I have to, you know, I have to throw harder. I have to definitely put more into it. It's just more physically taxing on me to have to do that,
Mm-hmm.
especially over and over and over again. Like today, I went to the field for an hour and a half and I was throwing backhand and I'm, pushing to where I would be, getting with the forehand for max distance. And I'm like, I'm not sore at all. I know if I was doing it for that long with the
Mm-hmm.
forehand, I'd be feeling it right now. So it is
Yeah, for sure.
definitely, yeah, it's just a matter of like, I mean, if it's what I need to do in for the birdie, like that's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna do. It's funny actually because when we were in Charlotte, I said to Derek, I was like, there are times where I kind of wish I was right-handed, just because I just feel like, especially when you're just seeing the righty shot over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
There are certainly courses where I'm like, a righty hyzer just would be really, really nice to have, like a righty
Yeah.
backhand hyzer. And
Mm-hmm.
his response was like, I don't want to play like everybody else. So I think he would be a good example of somebody. It's like, he kind of enjoys that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I don't have a great turnover, a backhand turnover game. I'm not
Mm.
great at that shot. Like when I see Nathan Queen, who's just a master of
Yeah.
knowing the breaking point and playing holes that way, like I'm hitting that shot so much less often.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so much more capable of, you know, 70-80% of the time hitting that line with the forehand and then like 20% with the backhand. So I'm just
Yeah.
not going to do that. I'm not
Yeah.
taking that chance unless it's, there's no other option.
Yeah. Awesome. Really cool. I really appreciate you diving into that and just kind of sharing a little bit of like your experience playing disc golf, being a lefty playing in Minnesota. And now I want us to, because you've kind of touched on a little bit, throwing the forehand, throwing the backhand, distance, angles, nose control, all these kinds of things. I'd love for us to dive into this disc golf skill of the forehand. It's the first time in season 2 that we're talking about the forehand, and I'm really excited about that because, as I mentioned earlier, it's like really, I even think to this day it's still kind of my strongest, or I won't say dominant because I do throw a lot more backhands, but I definitely think the forehand is still kind of my strongest shot in the game. It's just as easy for me to execute. It feels comfortable. I feel like I can control the disc a lot better, and so I'm just really excited to talk about this. So obviously you've done a lots of forehands over the years. You mentioned this a little earlier. You play with a lot of guys that threw lefty, but how did you teach yourself to throw the forehand? Like, was it you just saw what people did and you emulated that? Did you kind of watch a lot of disc golf videos to kind of learn how to throw it to really improve?
It was mostly, I would say, for my specific brand, it was a lot of just watching the guys around me who didn't have power forehands. I don't come from like a baseball background, and I didn't come up around a lot of guys with like power forehands. So I would definitely fall more in the realm of like the finesse forehand, really, working the angles. I'm sure I probably cap in like the low 60s, maybe mid 60s, whereas like I know guys hitting 75 miles an hour with their
Mm,
forehands. I
wow.
don't have that. I don't have that sports background, so I just have to work with what I have. Sorry, guys. Um, I might have to. Sorry, my dogs are getting they're having fun
Oh,
down
you're
here.
good.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with that, where it's just a matter of, yeah, I was watching it and
Hmm.
definitely was impacted by just, the people that were around me. So
Yeah. And so now, like over the last couple of years, like it doesn't sound like you started off throwing, 400 foot forehands. How did you uh, kind of develop that skill set over the last couple of years?
I would say the thing that I am has helped me a lot is throwing forehands with more of like a passive arm, which is, what I would suggest, for new players. I think a lot of people, they pick up a disc and it's just like they're throwing with all of their arm. They're not using their body. it makes
Mm-hmm.
it way, it's just like getting the easy rotational spin kind of, like my wife is actually a really good example of that, where it's just all whip. It's not really a whole lot of basically just uses the arm and just kind of does what she does. But for me, it was a matter of you know like when I'm throwing, this arm is as loose as it can possibly be. I've heard
Mm-hmm.
people refer to it as like rubber arm, and really a
Mm.
matter of trying to position yourself so that for me, my left knee is dropping in. It's kind of opening up the hips, and everything else is just kind of following. So it's kind of like that coil effect, very similar to a backhand. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just kind of placing the disc where I want it to be, and I'm allowing my body to rotate, kind of coil, and then the arm just kind of follows through, which does put a lot of strain on that inner elbow.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, that was, first time I, pushed that like 400-foot mark. It was just a matter of like passive arm, getting my angle right, getting it high enough in
Yeah.
the air with the nose down, letting the disc kind of, do the work. Um, so yeah, I'm super reliant on that for sure.
Very cool. And so with that, you mentioned a couple elements of the forehand throw there. Obviously, there's a lot of things that are going on. I firmly believe like the backhand is a little bit more complicated than the forehand. But that being said, what would you say if somebody needed to improve their forehand or was wanting to really start working on it? Maybe it's non-existent. What would be the most important part of the forehand throw that you feel like they need to sort of get right first, or like be making progress with in order to really help their forehand progress?
I think just being fluid and smooth, and like for me, I'm quite slow on the tee, to the extent where at this point I am trying to ramp it up a little bit to try to push more of that kind of power forehand, putting
Mm-hmm.
more body into it. But I've always just been a fan of just, trying to be as smooth as possible, and just kind of letting is basically that's how I'm getting as much spin into the disc as possible. I'm just trying to like let that arm be loose
Mm-hmm.
and have a slow and controlled run up. And that's worked well for me to this
Yeah.
point. I just feel like you see a lot of guys that are, yeah, they're just kind of like running into it. They're kind of like hopping into their shot,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you pulling through with a lot of arm. Also, a big thing is I think I naturally throw nose down. I've just kind of, well, that's over years, but getting that nose down is also a huge thing. You see a lot of people when they first get into forehands, they obviously unintentionally they sky it, they throw it really high up into the air.
Yeah.
So it is a matter of like learning just like how to hold the disc in a way where it's coming out nose down. So it kind of forces that disc not only to come out low, but then it kind of naturally will flip up for you as well when you're throwing
Mm-hmm.
that nose down. Same thing with like a backhand. You throw nose up, it's going to go up in the air. It's going to spike right down. When I first started playing forehands, of course, I started by, that would happen to me where it'd be way higher than I intended.
Mm-hmm.
It'd stall and come back down. So it was just a matter of like, okay, what do I need to do where I'm
Right.
getting good spin on this thing? It's nose down. It kind of just naturally wants to pop up on its own, and I've kind of developed like a natural flex to my forehand. I've
Mm-hmm.
had people point it out to me. I'm not very good at just throwing pure hyzers because I have like a natural flex to my forehand from being pretty aggressively nose down.
Mm.
But
Okay.
that's also great for wind. Like I can
Yeah.
throw forehands in the wind, and it's not as impacted because it's cutting through the wind because that nose
Yeah.
is down.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. So I love that idea of being fluid, especially with the arm, because, just to reiterate everything you were just saying, already when people try to throw a backhand, they tend to throw with a lot of arm just naturally when they're first starting out. But especially with the forehand, it just feels even more isolated. You watch someone throw the forehand, and it doesn't look like they're using much of their body. It just looks so much even more so than the backhand. It looks very arm heavy. And so I love that idea of being fluid, that rubber arm concept. I really like that illustration. And one thing that I wanted to touch on when you were talking about nose angle, throwing it up, throwing it down, keeping it nice and flat. One of the things that I actually found through my experience with the forehand a couple years ago, excuse me, is I found, at least for myself, the way I throw the forehand is your chest. is an indicator for where the disc is going to go. One thing I've had is whenever I threw nose up, obviously, yes, the disc came up on a nose up angle, but what typically ended up happening was one of two things. My back foot either dragged, and so it kind of pulled me up on my throw, or I allowed my chest as I was throwing to kind of lift and rise. In this idea, in this attempt to get more power, I was raising my chest up towards the sky. And so what ends up happening is our bodies are going to follow whatever's leading them. So my arm was following where my chest was going, and my chest was going up. And so the disc is going to naturally go up. And so it was one of those things that almost didn't matter if I was holding it with a nose down angle, it was going nose down, sky high. So that was one of the things. So if you guys are struggling with, you know, nose angle, especially throwing nose up, pay attention, record yourself. Obviously, you want to make sure you're holding the disc with a good neutral nose angle. We say nose down, but obviously you don't want it to be like aimed at the ground when you throw. You want it to be neutral and flat, but pay attention to your chest angle. If you're throwing downhill, you want your chest to kind of be coming forward a little bit, aimed at the ground slightly, to make sure you're going to throw down the hill so that the disc goes with the elevation and doesn't just kind of fade out early. And same thing with uphill and neutral ground. Check that chest angle. That might be something that's really helpful for you to make sure that you are hitting the right angle every time. And even to this day, there's sometimes where, and I use it to my advantage. Like if I just this past weekend, I had to throw like I think it was my first shot. It was like 125 foot hyzer up over some trees. And one of the things I had to tell myself was keep that chest pointed up in order to get the disc up. So that might be something that helps some people who are listening. I love the loose arm, the fluid motion, obviously the nose angle, and combining those with that chest angle might really, really help. So one thing I wanted to ask you, Nick, is how do you, and this might be a really complicated question to unpack when it comes to form, but how do you maximize your distance in the forehand? Like when you're saying, I have this 450-foot max distance shot with my forehand, how are you kind of loading your body? How are you preparing to throw that shot? What are either some of the things you're thinking, or maybe they're subconscious now, you're not actively thinking about them, but you do them? Like to throw a 450-foot shot is a little bit different than throwing a 250-foot shot. So
Hmm.
how do you kind of throw for maximum distance?
Yeah, admittedly, my max that I've hit is probably about 425, and that's, I think, a lot to do with just my physical limitations. I do think that would be in the realm of possibility if I was a little bit more from an athletic background. But for me, when it comes to getting those big max distance shots, it is definitely very dependent on the disc. Like I'm not throwing like a super overstable disc for that. I'm also,
Mm-hmm.
for me to get to that type of distance, it is using that full S flight. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not somebody who can throw that on highs or get it to pop up and get that full ride. I know guys that have that. They definitely have higher arm speed, more physical ability with something like that. So for me to match something like that, it's definitely nose down, hitting that anhyzer right. For me, it's also not trying to I think forehand and backhand, when people want to throw farther, they think they have to like really run into that shot and like
Mm-hmm.
they're moving too fast. For me, the way that I'm able to do something like that is basically the exact same speed as say I would throw just like a fairway driver or something. It's just really trying to get as much spin into the disc. I am very reliant on getting it on the right angle with a lot
Mm-hmm.
of spin, um, making sure that I'm getting that full S flight. So, I'm making sure that, when that disc is lined up, I know that it's as soon as I get it, out of my hand, it's already starting to pan. It's that panning effect that you kind of get when you're hitting a nose down anhyzer with the right
Mm-hmm.
disc. If I threw that with a Halo Destroyer, it'll probably only go maximum of like 350 feet because it's like that disc doesn't want it's
Yeah.
actively trying to fight out of that. And people, I guess I can't really say exactly how that works for me. I've had people say like, I don't understand how you're able to get that disc to not burn over. So I think that is just a level of touch that comes from years and
Oh
years of
yeah.
practice.
Oh yeah.
It's hard to really, I guess, explain that. But for me,
Hmm.
I'm more likely to take like a super seasoned, you could be destroyer. Like I've thrown some destroyers. Obviously all destroyers are not created equal. You find some runs where like this is hardly, what's left of this is hardly what you'd call a destroyer. But with the speed of the disc and the ability to kind of hold that pan for a really
Hmm.
long ways before the disc wants to naturally flex out.
Yeah. So I'm hearing two things, and I think they go together. Is basically don't over overcorrect or over adjust your form to create this idea of maximum power. You want to stay in control of things. You're not adding a bunch of extra run up. But with that, and you kind of spent more time answering it with this, is disc selection. So you said earlier that you like to throw between like that 9 and 11 speed. That's kind of your sweet spot. You throw a lot of discs in that range. Do you have, do you layer discs, or do you have like, this is an overstable 11 speed, my neutral, my understable? Like, when you're going for a distance shot, what are you grabbing that you maybe wouldn't grab if you weren't going for a distance shot?
Me personally, I typically do reach for more of my like middle slot of that like more neutral or maybe
Mm-hmm.
even that understable slot depending on like what the conditions are. If
Right.
I can, I just know that I have to make sure I'm getting it higher in the air and that should get
Mm-hmm.
me more distance. Like I'm not going to take that disc and throw it on a just like, a low line drive because I know it's going to burn into the ground. So for me to get that big distance shot, yeah, I'm making sure I'm throwing it maybe 10 feet higher than I would typically be throwing just like a stock flip up type golf. It's not what I would maybe call like a golf shot. It is
Mm-hmm.
definitely when you're going for just same thing as backhand, where when I see my buddy Cal Longquist when he throws a pushing 700-foot distance shot, it's not what you call a standard type of shot because he's throwing it with extreme anhyzer so high in the air that
Yeah.
it's just panning so far that you just
Yeah.
couldn't do that on like a standard golf line. So for me,
Yeah.
max distance, yeah, it's definitely taking something that's more neutral or understable and just making sure that I'm hitting the right angle way higher than I'd normally throw.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. And obviously, I mean, you got to have a lot of space. The fairway's got to be open for those kinds of things. And, naturally, I have found that most wood courses aren't calling for a max distance shot, which I like. I like wood courses more than it's funny. You were saying how you love like the park style course. And that's like my worst nightmare. It's just playing a big old park style course. I prefer the wooded golf, but yeah, as you've been talking about all these things, obviously I'm thinking about ways that I can improve my forehand. But one of the things that I'm realizing is like, huh, I've never really messed around with flex shots. I've never really messed around with trying to get max distance by manipulating the disc in that kind of way. Like typically what I'll just naturally do is like force myself to be like, gotta throw it flat to get that distance. You're not throwing a flex shot or anything. Like I've never, it feels weird to say, but I've never actually had the thought to be like, hey, take this. Right now I have the Clash Disc Salt as my distance driver. I just started carrying distance drivers a few months ago, not very long time. And I really like the Salt a lot. It's been great, but it's never occurred to me to put that disc on anhyzer to try and get max distance out of it. And it's definitely something that I will be going to the field here in the next couple of weeks and probably just messing around with and seeing like what can I do on the backhand and the forehand with some of these discs, because it's as strange as it is to say, it's probably even stranger to hear like, yeah, I don't mess around with flex shots a whole lot. So that's one aspect of my game that I feel like I could definitely learn, because when someone like you've been talking about throwing with that angle, giving it extra height, allowing it to pan. I'm like, I can't think of the last time I tried to do that.
Yeah.
It's just it's not a shot that I've really worked on.
Um, yeah, it's funny that you say that though, because like I've gone to a field just like to compare the distance between just like a pure hyzer flip type shot to that type of shot. And at the time I was actually doing them standstill. I just wanted to see like, which of these goes farther for me.
Hmm.
And they basically went about the same distance. But for me, like I felt more confident in that. I felt I was more likely to kind of roll my wrist on doing the hyzer flip. Like I still, throw hyzer flips. And I also wouldn't say that I have basically your textbook forehand. Like I said, I have these physical
Right.
limitations that I've kind of just worked around. And with the courses that I play, it's worked for me. If it were up to me, yeah, I would love to have Chris Clemens' forehand, which is just absolutely textbook.
Yeah.
But like I realized that like I'm gonna work with what I have and I'm gonna push it as far as I can. So
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing so much of this and everything. And so to wrap up this forum discussion, we didn't get into necessarily like the nitty gritty of how to do everything, but I think there's a lot of good conversation here talking about keeping loose, moving slow, keeping that arm sort of this like very you might hear, you know, like slow is smooth and smooth is far, and that applies here. But I love this idea of like sort of having like rubber in the arm, like it's very very flexible. There's obviously control over it, but you're not whipping the disc with your arm, you're using your body, engaging that lower body, which is a big thing that a lot of people don't think about when throwing their forehand, is getting those feet and those knees and those hips driving into that plant foot to really help initiate the throw here, and then allowing your body to lead the throw and that arm will follow suit. There's a lot of similar principles. you know the positioning of it for everybody listening is different than the backhand, but the principles of starting from the ground up, driving it obviously with your body, and then your arm will follow. Those are the principles that we talk about for the backhand that are going to apply to the forehand as well. Um, so go ahead and be working on that. If you guys need help with this skill, if you're saying, hey, I'm trying to get more distance in my forehand, I'm trying to fine tune some things, or I don't have a forehand, I need help. What you can do is you can DM me on Instagram or on Discord, and I will give you a free coaching call to talk about it. So it'll be 30 minutes, you and I just talking, breaking down your forehand or any other skill that you want to talk about, whether it's putting, backhand, how to approach a basket. If you're brand new to the game, how do you even build a bag? We can talk about those things. All you have to do is DM me to schedule a free coaching call for your first call. So let's go ahead and let's get into the disc review. The disc review, I have a new sponsor, guys. It's kind of crazy. The last couple weeks have been unexpected, I will say. I woke up to an email one day and I'm just really excited about this new opportunity with GottaGoGottaThrow disc golf wholesale, and really really excited to be working with them. In the description you'll find my affiliate link and all those things, and one of the things that's really cool is uh, GottaGoGottaThrow doesn't just sell discs. They have bags, they have baskets, they have other merchandise, they have apparel, they have a lot of things that you guys will be able to get to improve your disc golf game. And one of the things that they have is today's disc. So I asked Nick, as I do with every guest that comes on the show, what's your favorite disc? And every time I ask that, I get the same reaction. Every single person hearts that message and is super quick to reply with their favorite disc because they want to talk about it, and I get it. On my channel I get to talk about my favorite discs a lot, but today we are talking about the Innova Wraith. It's an 11-speed distance driver. It has 5 glide, -1 turn, 3 fade according to the flight numbers. Some people might beg to differ, some people might say it's flippier, but Nick, it's your favorite disc, so I'm going to let you take the reins here and just kind of talk about it. And I'll jump in with some of my experiences in throwing the Wraith. But what have you got to share with us today?
yeah, I would say the Wraith is my favorite disc because it is basically the destroyer for the masses. it being the most popular distance driver, I think we all, reach for a destroyer, arguably too soon. I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but I know I did.
Mm-hmm.
The Wraith being a little bit slower, but obviously just one speed slower, but the rest of the numbers are the same as the Destroyer. It's just something that you're able to get similar flights that you would see your touring pros throwing, but you can do it with your arm speed.
Mm-hmm.
A big reason why it became just my staple driver was actually because of my good friend and touring pro, Cal Longquist. He
Mm.
had been the one who had pointed out to me, like, I really think that you're having to like force over the destroyers, at least the ones at the time that I had in my bag. They were brand new. Like, I think you're having to work too hard to make that disc fly for you. I think
Mm-hmm.
you'd have far more success and you'd be able to work on your angles, push the distance if you threw star wraiths. So at that point, I took destroyers out of my bag. I recommend to many people try to, really focus on just learning how to throw slower discs and manipulate those slower discs. But for
Yeah.
me, I was happy to obviously it's still 11 speed. And, I throw far slower than 11 speed, but for that distance driver, I just think that for me, I've just never found anything that feels more comfortable in my hand. If you're somebody who doesn't have very large hands, it's going to be that rim's a little
Mm-hmm.
bit smaller, so it's going to sit a little bit more comfortable. Obviously, you can find them in all sorts of different weights. I know plenty of FPO or like FA1, FA2 players that love the Wraith. So it's just a great disc all around.
Mm-hmm.
It's just more approachable. And especially too, when you start getting beyond like a 12 speed, 13 speed, 14 speed, those can get a lot more squirrely, especially
Oh
if you're
yeah.
somebody who's relying on like a 13, 5, -2, 2, like that type of disc can really start to get squirrely on you and wants to, turn over. And so you start, messing up your shots. Whereas with the Wraith, I don't really ever seem to have that problem where
Yeah.
it's just turning and burning on me into the
Right.
ground, not
A lot more
expecting that.
control.
Yeah,
Yeah.
control is the name of the game.
Yeah, I don't blame you if Cal told me somebody who throws over 700 feet, if he told me, hey, take this disc out of your bag and put this one in his head, I think I would probably have the same reaction. Sounds good. Take everything out and put the new stuff in. I love that. I love that. And I actually, as I mentioned earlier, haven't thrown a lot of. I just put distance drivers in the bag, like to actually be carrying. I've thrown them in the field for disc reviews, messing around with them, but I've actually never, after I kind of was working on my disc golf game and realizing, hey, you got to be able to throw like these putters and mids and fairway drivers pretty far before you're going to really be able to unlock what a distance driver can do for you. And so I've just spent years working on that and building that my game. And so now, uh, I kind of like pride myself on being like, yeah, I throw a lot of putters and mids, and my go-to driver is a 7-speed driver. Like, I don't reach for the distance drivers and those kinds of things just because my comfort is in that slower speed. But there was a time where I did pick up a Wraith. I was doing the Gladiator disc golf subscriber bag, and the distance drivers that people picked, no surprise, the overstable one was the Destroyer, but the neutral one was the Wraith. And I'm not going to lie, when I, didn't have a ton of experience throwing distance drivers, when I saw those results as what people said, hey, this is a good neutral driver, I'm like, it's literally just a little slower than a destroyer. This is just going to be another overstable disc. And I had a champion, a champion Wraith, which champion plastic tends to be pretty beefy. But when I threw this Wraith, I was shocked. Like, yes, it is still an overstable disc. It's going to fade on you. But I could not believe I had a Destroyer and a Wraith right next to each other. And I could not believe how much easier it was to throw the Wraith versus the Destroyer. Uh, just that one speed difference made all the difference. It is definitely a great high speed distance driver. But as Nick, you were saying, like, it's way more easier to control. For slower arm speeds, you're still going to be able to get some work out of it. Obviously, if you just started disc golf, if you're not able to hit 200, 250 feet yet, this is not going to be a disc that you need to be worrying about and touching. But if you're in that 350, 375, trying to push your distance, you're improving your form and working on those things. Something like a Wraith, whether it's a G Star Wraith, a beaten Star Wraith, or something along those lines, could be a great way to introduce distance drivers into your game if you haven't done so already. And I was just so impressed with the Wraith. I thought it was awesome to see just such a cool flight. I was expecting a meat hook. I'm like, yeah, I know Garrett Gurthey has a has a Tour Series Wraith, and Nathan Queen has a Tour Series Wraith, but those guys can make anything look flippy, you know? So
Hmm.
it was really cool to actually see the Wraith get some turn, especially in that Champion Plastic. I can't speak for all Champion Wraiths, but the one that I got was a brand new one, and it had some turn, and it was just really cool to see. And so the Wraith has been one of those discs just always in the back of my mind, like, man, it'd be fun to come back to that and to throw that and to mess around with it. And who knows, I might do that after this conversation. But but definitely I've only had good experiences with the Wraith. Obviously, we want to be smart when we're throwing a distance driver because it's going to require power. It's going to require good form. With that sharp nose, it's going to be more easily affected by poor execution in the throw. So, keep those things in mind. But like Nick, you were saying, it's comfortable in the hand for backhand and forehand. It comes in a variety of plastics. So you can find the plastic that works for you. You can find the different weights. And there are two people right here, me and you, that are definitely endorsing this disc. So if you guys want to check out an Innova Wraith or just restock on your supply, head to GottaGoGottaThrow discs and use the link in the description below or use code Gladiator and you get a discount on your purchase, and I actually get a little kickback as well, and you support me and this channel. So I would really appreciate it if you did, if you were looking for a Wraith or any other disc. Uh, Everybody, that is the end of the episode. Nick, it was so great having you on the show, man. I really appreciate our conversation. It's been great getting to know you in this talk, and I look forward to, collaborating more in the future. And I don't know the next time I'll find myself in Minnesota. I've been once before. It was a long time ago. But if you ever find yourself in Nashville, Tennessee, definitely let me know, and we could definitely hang out. All right, you guys. Well, we'll go ahead and sign off here. If you want to follow Nick, check out Mr. and Mrs. Bogey on Instagram. I'll put a link in the description, and definitely go and support them and follow them. They make great content. And that is all we have for this week, guys. Remember, make sure you go out and teach someone how to play disc golf, whether it's taking someone brand new to the course or just giving an encouraging word and some coaching tips to someone. Make sure you also go out and have some fun and play disc golf this week. And until next time, everybody, have a great round.